My name is, like the introducer said, Udayan Mitra. I'm executive publisher at HarperCollins. My connect with this session and the reason I'm particularly thrilled is that, I've been at HarperCollins for 6 years now. Before that, for ages and ages, I was at Penguin. And when in the 1990s, I joined Penguin in 1997, and some of the most exciting things that happened around that time, Kavery's Scent of Pepper, I think, had just been published, 96 maybe, and Mango Colored Fish was published probably 98. Manju's Difficult Daughters, which was a Faber book. Faber at that point was being represented in India by Penguin, came out in 98, 99, something like that. And Amitava's Passport Photos was 2000, if I'm not wrong. And these were hugely exciting books. And it's just a privilege at a personal level for me to be on this session and to be talking to 4 writers who I would say hands down are some of the most exciting writers we have had the privilege to read. I did not have the opportunity to read Devika's book 25 years ago, as you might imagine, because her book for her first novel, Quarter Life, just came out. And I can again say it's, to my mind, one of the most exciting books in the fiction space to have been published in the last several years. It's terrific. If you haven't read it, please do read it. She will read a little bit from it. All of the authors here will read a little bit from their works. Thankfully, unlike some other sessions, we have time here. And it's the evening, sort of the sun has just set, I think, or is just about to set. And we can relax and have a reasonably relaxed conversation. When we are talking about literature, the conversation is never entirely relaxed. We tend to get excited and agitated and so on. But what I thought we would do is ask general questions, and then in turn our authors can answer as the questions apply to them. So I'll start off with a question of first novels, and I have had the privilege of reading everybody's first novels. What was that? And Devika will also be able to answer this. She will not be able to answer the next question, which is about the second novel. What was the experience like of writing the first novel? Many of us think that we have a book in us. When we actually come down to writing it, sometimes the process is much more difficult than we had imagined. So was it a more difficult process than you thought it would be? And how satisfying was the reception? We'll start with you, Devika, because your book has just come out. So yeah.
So I started writing this novel in the run-up to the 2014 election.
Yeah.
And just to take you all back to that time, it was a very electrifying time. You had all the, anti-corruption movements. You had the Nirbhaya, the sort of women's rights movements, recriminalization of homosexuality. So you just had people my age. I was in my quarter life. We were in the streets. We were raising placards after having had, if you were from the middle class, a very kind of apolitical existence till that point. And so I had just returned from a degree in the US, and I was so caught up in this moment, and I felt that this was a kind of changing of the guards that's going to be here for a while. That I knew, as you said, that was that moment when I recognized that this is going to be my first book, this is my subject. I had no idea at the time that I would spend 7 years writing it.
Right.
I thought it's going to be a year, it's going to be 2 years, 3, 5, finally it was 7 writing, and almost a decade by the time it was published and out post-pandemic. And I think during that time, what struck me is I did a lot of research for the book. It's a book about young people finding their politics in contemporary India. And I spent a lot of time talking with people, young people across the spectrum, whether it was young boys in right-wing organizations or young people, journalists covering, through RTI covering mining. So like literally across the political spectrum, people in slums, people in high-rises, about why they were voting the way they did, why they were feeling the way they did. And as I got deeper into it, I was just struck by India's enormous complexity, especially when it comes to the subject I was writing about, which is politics. And I realized that in a lot of Indian writing in English I'd read till that point, it felt like there were two religions, Hindu and Muslim, or there were two castes, Dalit and Brahmin, or there were, two positions, a left party on the left and one on the right, when actually politics in India is nothing like that. You can't write a book about democracy in India if you don't include regional parties, if you don't know why a boy from a village in Maharashtra who loves Shivaji is voting for the BJP and not the Shiv Sena. And so I think that is why, just to render that complexity and to really keep pace with the moment, I think that's why it took a long, long time. And I'm happy that that is something that has been accepted by the readers, that they have appreciated that complexity rather than found it daunting. And so, that's been the journey.
Yep. Thanks. Kavery, of course, Scent of Pepper was not your first book. Truth About Bharat was the first book. What was that like? And what was the reception like? Yeah.
I was writing for children for a few years before I wrote my first adult novel. And I wrote short stories, I wrote a few short books, which did well. So I sort of gained some sort of confidence. By the way, I'm a doctor. I was a practicing surgeon until recently. So writing became a sort of a second, first just a passion, but later more or less like a second career. When I wrote, the idea for The Truth Almost About Bharat happened sort of very quickly on a two-day trip to Kochi. And somehow I got the idea, and then I started writing. I didn't have any idea of how one goes about writing a novel. I just started pretty soon, and I wrote because the character was building in my head very fast. And it was, being a short book, I finished it in 3 months.
Right.
So that was unusual. Yeah. I never did that after that. But I wrote the book, and then I didn't know how you go to publishers. Finally, there was Penguin. Everybody had heard of Penguin. So I got the address from some book, and I wrote to the publisher saying, I think they wanted first 3 chapters or something. So I sent first 3 chapters. And about 6 weeks later, I got a reply saying, yes, we would like to see the rest of it. So
that's a very exciting moment, no?
Yes.
Always, yes.
And then when I sent it, it was accepted. Yes. So I was, I must say, very fortunate with my first book. But I was totally illiterate about what publishing is all about, what books are about, novel writing. I knew very little. I'm not really a literary person. I wasn't to start with. Yeah, although I read a lot of books, I didn't really, have that type of strength of any literary background, being a doctor. So, and I remember meeting David for lunch, I think, here in Bangalore, after some time. Yeah. And he said, you're a surgeon and you're all this. And where is this place you work in? I mean, he'd not even heard of Cood, So he was sort of wondering which remote place this female comes from. So anyway, it was a remote place.
Yes.
But that book did well in the sense that it stayed very popular with all types of people. Only thing is, everybody would ask me, did you really write this book? Or was it, because it's a 19-year-old male protagonist and who's a medical student who gets kicked out of college and, things like that. And he goes off on his motorbike. But it was, of course, it was my book. So that was a very interesting experience, the first experience, and I knew that I was going to write more fiction.
Yes. Yep. Manju, how about you? Was the process of writing Difficult Daughters a long one? Did it come very easily?
Oh, it was so long, so long, so long. It was rejected time and again, 8 times. Okay, so I was 41 when I thought of writing a novel. And I taught English literature in a women's college, Miranda House in Delhi University. And you teach these books. And in a way, these are the classics. This is the canon. So you don't think you can ever equal that. And since you're trained to look at that as some kind of gold standard, if you can't equal that, why are you trying?
Why are you?
So, okay. But around the time I turned 40, I began to feel ambitious. Now, I had not been trained to feel ambitious in any way. My mother wanted me to be a teacher. She said, "Phir ghar ke liye time hoga, ye hoga, wo hoga, etc., etc." You can do something, but not too much. So around that time, I started writing in 1991, but this was still the post-Rushdie era,
Yes.
which saw a huge mushrooming of people who decided, and they were going to be writers. And also, I think what Midnight's Children gave us was, in some ways, a language that was an English that was ours, not an English of, our English, like saying 2233, this or whatever, the names of spices, this and that. So there, and my friends were all writing. Now, the canon is one thing, your friends are another. So then, if your friends are writing, you feel you can surely write as well. So I started, and I had no idea of what I was going to say or what I was going to do. I started with some kind of autobiography that, started writing about a woman teacher who's 40, who's divorced, who's alone in a DDA flat, and how come she ended up like that. Okay, I go on and on and on and on, and 80 pages later, I look at her mother's history, then to look at her mother's history, I look at her mother's history. Remember, I'm an English teacher. We are taught to look at context big time. Every kind of context, family, social, economic, political, whatever. So here I am looking at all this context, doing all this research, going to Teen Murthy Library, looking at the Tribune on microfilm, taking mad notes, researching, asking people, reading history books, going to Lahore, going to Nahan, going to Amritsar, going here, going there, going everywhere. Okay. And then I write this book, and it's almost 200,000 words.
Wow.
And all that research.
Right.
And then I cut it a little bit. But when you're a beginning writer, you're in love with every word you write. You think it's wonderful. Nobody else does, but you do. So then, okay, reject. Each rejection made me cut. And I was rejected by all the publishers in India. Finally, I sent it to Faber at the advice of a friend. And that guy, who also said cut, so you can imagine how much I had to cut.
Right.
He said, it's architecturally clumsy, there's so many characters, mother, grandmother, all. So then I said, well, if I do all this work, will you take it? He said, it depends on a manuscript we are both satisfied with, which meant I was satisfied with it anyway.
Right.
So then at the end of this long, long, long process, eight years passed. And I won't say I learned to become a writer, because each successive book was another, step in the learning process. Yeah. But it won a prize, which was a good thing for me, because, I like coming to LitFest, but that's about it. So I stay in my room and write, or I teach. I taught for, another 10, 15 more years before I resigned and said, okay, now I believe in myself as a writer. Now I can resign my job. Now I won't have to face emptiness, nothingness in the morning when I get up, or when the writing doesn't go well. Instead, I substituted my students with some plants. I looked at the garden. If I have writer's block, which in fact I never do because I write a lot of rubbish, so then I just go to the garden and talk to my plants and malis, and they're my buddies, and that's my writing day and process and history. So that's it. So
That's just fascinating. There are actually a couple of things from there that I'll pick on, but I wanted to ask Amitava first. Was Passport Photos your first published book? Yeah, book of poems before that. Sorry.
No, no, take it.
Yeah. How easy was it? And did you know that you wanted to be a published writer? Because you came from an academic background. So.
Yeah, I thought I was a writer, even though I wrote nothing and published nothing. When I was 6. Achha, by the way, is that person still swimming in the pool? Can you?
This person has been fascinating Amitava and me
Yes,
for the last several minutes. So, yeah.
One person by himself just swimming. I thought that's how an artist or a writer should be.
Yeah.
Don't give a damn.
Yeah.
Float kar raha hai banda.
Oblivious to literary festival sessions happening around us. Do your own thing.
So, yeah, I wanted, but I was not getting anything written. So you wanted the story of the first. Yeah, man. At first I thought I should write. You want to write a book, any book.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought it should be a novel necessarily. But then I entered academia and I thought, it's if you're really smart, you don't write a novel. You write a treatise or something. And that was a stupid trap that I was in for a few years. But I wanted to invent new forms, and that's why I wrote Passport Photos, which is structured like a passport.
Right.
Phir, I read when there was an attack in the subway in Japan, Haruki Murakami came back to Japan and did interviews because he thought that was the way in which he was going to re-enter the life of his nation. And I thought after the Gujarat riots that I should do interviews too and learn a bit, So that took me into non-fiction for a few years. And then I thought I should write a novel. And for me, very quickly, it was, you go into some shops and it says for export only, or, like mangoes or textiles from India, I'm saying. So I thought, what would a novel look like that was not for export? So I wrote a book called Home Products. Because I thought many novels were being written, particularly at that time, in India, that was for export only.
Yeah.
Where a samosa would be explained as a savory dish with, blah, blah, blah. So how to write where the samosa doesn't have to come with a little... you are too young to know, but this was our books at that time. For potato dumpling, So that was how the first novel came about. This desire to write something that if someone was reading it, it would seem as if it was even written in Hindi.
Yeah.
Except it was in English.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to pick up on something that Manju had said and that you also touched on, but before, we wanted to have readings from all four of you. So if we could start with you, Kavery, and if you just read a little bit from, which one are you reading from?
I'll read from a town like ours.
Okay, lovely. Right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. I'll read from this novel, which is more recent in the sense it was, I think, 2014. After that, I wrote two non-fiction books. And my next novel will hopefully be out by next year.
Yeah.
I myself find that the progression of my writing of fiction, I understand when I read these books. I mean, I haven't read this book now for 10 years, but let me read just a first paragraph and then a little subsequent.
Sure, sure.
It'll be 2 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Cross the road as soon as you get off at the main bus station, and it being 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon, have tea and a mapla biscuit at Balan's Unti Angadi. Loiter briefly beneath the neem tree for a smoke. And for relief from that certain internal distress, go behind the aged wall. We have miles and miles of such uncomplaining barriers of brick and mortar. And where would men be without them? Ask not why a wall is built and then left to crumble over the years. Ask only that you be permitted to stand facing it, with your elbows loosely flexed, your index finger and thumb doing the one manly duty learnt early in childhood. Coming on to just the introduction. This is, enter the temple. This is all about a small village which has, over the years, morphed into a small town. Enter the temple premises. Seek the blessings of our goddess, if you must. And turning left, head for the farthest corner. Here, next to the outer stone wall, is a room. It is mine. I will see visitors if you don't mind sitting on the edge of the mattress that's been padded with 2 prison blankets to protect my delicate hams. You are small enough to manage. Everyone is small enough. The air is stale. Yes, the squarish gap in the wall is the only opening for some air. I am the chudail with the red light on my tail. Visiting me does not necessarily link you to horse, although in the eyes of some people it might. Kumari is my name. The doctor who has been to England to fail an exam calls me princess and wastes his half degree by teaching me words like micturi in a language I do not speak. You see, I used to be a beauty once, just 9 years ago. How it was those days. One touch of the elbow, a hushed glance, a yellow smile, a scissored cat-footing zigzag chase across the street to a neglected shed behind the big hotel where a once blue car was slowly giving up its ghost. There in that shed, with pointed stalks of marigold springing from beneath the hand gears of the car, through the cobweb netting between the seats, on that Rexine love couch, made smooth by 1,000 slow rides of whore bottoms, in that gap between heaven and hell, many fell, never to recover. The truth is somewhat less dangerous and more ugly.
Lovely, thank you. So I wanted to pick up on something that Manju had touched on, and it's been actually going around in my head ever since this session was put together by the Bangalore Lit Fest and gave me this opportunity to talk to all of you. So 3 of you started writing in the 1990s, and as Manju pointed out, I mean, that was the time of Rushdie. It was also the time of God of Small Things won the Booker in 1997. And that changed a lot of things for Indian literature. One of the things it changed was that talking about samosas, I don't think samosas featured in that book, but what it did was, it was one of the very first books published in English in India where, italics were not used for Indian words. So Malayalam words were used in, plain text, which is called Roman, rather than italics, which is the way it used to be. If you use italics for a word, that means you're, in a way, you're exoticizing it. So she was making this point about normalizing. Things took off from there. Kiran Desai won the Booker for Inheritance of Loss. Arvind Adiga won the Booker for White Tiger. The Booker is not the only criteria, but many things happened in Indian publishing. Now, you've had writing careers of, say, 25 years or more in some cases. How have things changed? I mean, when you look at audiences, I don't want this session to get into distribution and retail and media and all of that. But just when you look at readers and readerships, do you feel like you are writing for a different readership now than you did in the 1990s? Is it a more evolved readership? Is it a more intelligent readership? Is your sense of the reader, has that itself changed? Amitava, we'll start with you.
Sure. If you're in a classroom where the teacher has you take tests every week, you become a little bit more conscious of what is being taught. Yeah. And now in India, what has really changed in the last 10, 20 years is the phenomenon of the literary festival. So because you're appearing at literary festivals, I mean, if you're lucky and you get invited, then you're more conscious of the readers that way. The readers become a greater presence in your life. At least I think that's important. On the other hand, does it mean that more people are reading? I don't know. That would require a bit more data in the sense कि भाई किताबें बिक रही हैं और फिर लोग पढ़ रहे हैं कि नहीं? Or is it more of a celebrity thing that is happening? Because I don't know whether literary taste has increased. Certainly the fashion taste among authors has increased. I see that people, have become much more conscious of that at festivals. I'm being a little critical, but let it go. I certainly think that my hope is that readership has increased that way because there is this constant appearance or accounting that you have to do.
Devika, how about you? I mean, not to talk about 25 years ago, but when you wrote Quarter Life, when you wrote Quarter Life, what was the readership you were thinking of, and do you think you reached that readership?
So to be very honest, I was not thinking of the readership at all. Okay. There was almost a kind of willful amnesia or blindness at the thought of any kind of markets. Later on, once I had written the book and it was out with agents, I saw it slowly. I was just chasing the subject. And I was doing it in the language. I did not question the English because I was born and sort of raised in it. And so I just took it for granted that this is my language. If I exist, then Indian writing in English exists. And I took all the forms that I had gathered from post-colonial literature that I'd read, from modernist literature. I did not feel any need to censor myself I did not feel any shyness in taking or not taking any form of influence. I felt open to it all, and I was just chasing after capturing the subject that I was obsessed with. And then when I was sending the book out to agents was when it started to dawn on me what kind of beast I had created. Because I would get feedback from Indian agents saying, they would pick up on the modernist form and say, this is quite Western, MFA, ye, wo for India. And then when I sent it to agents in the West, they would say, the level of complexity is, the political complexity is something that won't sell over here. And so, of course, the book spent a long time getting rejected because I think it was something unfamiliar, perhaps. And finally, of course, I think it takes just a handful of good people to pivot it out there. I was very fortunate to get Rahul Soni and Udayan at HarperCollins, my agents in India and now abroad. And finally, most recently, a US editor picked it up who is publishing it in the US without a single change. All the mahars and kunbis and little microcasts and everything in the novel is preserved. Because she believes that if the East can read complexity from the West, why shouldn't it be the other way around?
Absolutely.
So hopefully it's found its way now. Yeah.
Manju, how about you? Your thoughts on this? Yeah. No.
I don't believe you can really write effectively with an audience in mind. You're writing because you have something to say. At least I was writing because I had something to say, things that I felt about women, about families, about the way in which families mirrored gender issues, particularly because, I'm a woman, I have daughters, I taught women students, and so I was close to their lives. But, I wouldn't even say I wrote for them, because the minute you have an audience, writing is so hard as it is. And then the minute you're not writing to fully express what you have to say, as best as you can say it, but have, some kind of second party there, which is an audience, then at least for me, the whole process becomes a bit fraught. As I said, it's so fraught as it is. I find it very difficult to write. Although, in a way, I mean, writing brings out me at my meest, at my, I'm most myself perhaps when I'm writing because I'm digging deep inside myself. So in that sense, and I believe that women need to express themselves because then they are more themselves. But this audience business, I mean, okay, later, the thing is also about this question, is that a writer needs and wants to be read. I want to be read.
Of course, yes.
And I mean, that's why I am writing, all these million drafts, I'm polishing my text, I'm going over it and over it and over it, because I want to be read and received in a way I intended.
Yeah.
But all that comes later.
Yeah.
I consider myself a professional writer. I'm not sitting at home writing a diary. Okay, this is one, or a short story. I'm in it for the long haul. Each book takes me 5 years, though every time I finish a book, I say, now 2 years. Surely I can do a book in 2 years, but I can't, because this is the way I write. So this is what it is. The audience is very much there, but a bit removed, not immediately.
It's not the first thing on your mind.
No, it can't be. I'm sure no audience wants to read me thinking that, I don't know, I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure. So,
Kavery, what are your thoughts? I don't know if this one is working, so we'll keep it aside.
I seem to have pretty much the same way of writing every book, in the sense that
It has a life of its own.
I just wait until I get some sort of either a visual image or a sentence, something in my head which, pushes me, and then I just try to stay with it. I don't have a theme. When I start, I don't have a story in my head, just probably a faint idea of a character, what has happened. For instance, in the story that must not be told, I have a 75-year-old widower living in Madras all by himself in a high-rise apartment. So how does this man then, I just leave him alone. I don't know who he is. Then I try to think, what is his life like? Who was his wife? Has he got children? How was his married life? Was he happy? I think of those things. Then if an old man is living by himself, who's going to do the jobs for him, like buying things? So I create that person, the little young boy who comes to help him. So it goes on. So my story builds from scratch, and it becomes something in my head, and all the antennas start picking up. I found that the minute you hold on to a character and you create them honestly, in the sense that you allow the character to move. You don't try to tell the character which way to go, but you have created this character. You allow him or her to move, to do what their life demands. And then my story comes. And it takes nothing less than 6 months to 1 year of thinking. And in that process, I keep notebooks all over the house. And I write, little sentences or names or little ideas, something comes in my head. And one of the remarkable things that happens as you create is how your dreams begin to affect your ideas. I found I am a vivid dreamer. I can hold on to my dreams for quite long, and they're very colorful and they're very, very interesting. Unexpected, as dreams always are. And one fascinating thing about a dream is it is your own. Nobody else can see your dream. You are the only one. So I feel it is the most personal thing, is your dream. And I really respect dream and dreaming. And I have a whole notebook in which I've written my dreams, So that is not because I want to then use them. I don't even read them, but I just need to recollect that image. Yeah, I want it. And so it's a very strange time when I'm not writing. I think all writers will agree with me. We are not happy when we are writing because we don't know where it's going. We are very unhappy. And we are even more unhappy when we are not writing. So what the hell am I doing? I'm not writing, you know. So it's a very difficult thing. But once I feel that something is there, substance, then I begin to write. For me, as I said, character is more important to start with.
Yeah.
And then the plot, characters decide the plot, and I suddenly see a plot. And I find this is that every book has somewhere some hillock,
Yeah.
you know, some obstacle. And this character will go, and that obstacle, how is he going to face it? How is he going to overcome
How
it?
they're negotiating it.
That
Yes.
part
yes.
of it will come.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the emotions, you know, come out
Yeah.
from all this. Yes.
Thank you. Before I move to the next question, which is related, Devika, would you like to read a little bit from Quarter Life?
So this is a passage where Rohit, who is one of the protagonists, he's a young man who's grown up in his very cosmopolitan upbringing in Mumbai. And he is now going down the Konkan coast. He's been inspired by his American girlfriend who's from New England and is very nostalgic about her roots. And he's going down the Konkan coast on what he's called a hashtag roots tour. The Konkan coast has no formal boundaries. In some maps, even Bombay is on it. Though when Baba says Amcha Konkan, he means the shadowy strip between the hills and the sea that everyone bypasses on the expressway to Goa. And this is the land that Rohit wants to rediscover when he drives out in the old family Civic, the windows roll down and the monsoon wind in his hair. Online, he has described his hashtag Roots Tour as a trip to retrace his forefathers' journey from Velneshwar to Ratnagiri to Pune and to visit some historical sites along the way, a template that he received from Amanda. Then she declined his invitation to join him, which is fine. If this is a trip to understand all the threads that end up in his person, it's only fair that he should make it in his own company. The first rains are breaking over the great escarpment, its lack of vertical glory made up for by its horizontal expanse. And scanning the land for resonance, every detail feels imperative. Trees mirrored in basalt split by dynamite, grass on a thatched roof, new blades of rice, the water-filled fields reflecting the sky. To think this is where he is from, all this wind and rock and water, the stuff of his marrow. The Western Ghats, his GPS announces. Trust the British cartographers to ignore the traditional name in favor of a common Marathi word meaning steppes. To his grandparents, this range was always the Sahyadri. He looked up the name online, and it derives from two Sanskrit words. Adri means mountain, and Saya means that which endures. And isn't that perfect? These bizarre ridges go all the way back to Gondwana land. That valley contains dinosaur fossils older than the Everest. This is the Sahyadri.
Thank you, lovely. Okay, writing fiction, writing non-fiction. Devika's book is, Devika's first and only book so far is fiction. Manju Kapur has written only fiction, if I'm not wrong, yeah. Kavery has, of course, written both fiction and non-fiction. Her most recent published book is non-fiction. Amitava has written both fiction and non-fiction. In fact, so I would like to start with Amitava again here because he has a novel coming out, My Beloved Life, which comes out in a few months' time. And his new book of non-fiction, The Yellow Book, is just out. And even before this, I mean, you're not only have you published novels and non-fiction side by side, but in some ways they reflect on each other. Now, do you follow a different writing process for fiction, non-fiction? Also, given the the Alchemy of Words, which is the title of the session, how do you represent what you want to represent, whether it's yourself or the world around you, do you do it differently for fiction? Do you do it differently for non-fiction?
What is happening with the sound, by the way?
This one?
Okay.
Okay.
I can point it towards myself now, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't think well, what happened was, when our first child was born, there wasn't time to do research. So I thought I would write fiction. That really came off very well. Because just before that, I had written Husband of a Fanatic, and I had to travel to Pakistan. I had to go along the border and do interviews, maybe for 3 months. But once the child arrived, no chance to do that. So I thought, ki, every morning, I'll take a particular time off to just write fiction. Do I try to have a different voice? No, I actually try to blur the line between fiction and non-fiction, so that when I'm writing fiction, I try to introduce the conceit that it is almost a report from life. And then, of course, reviewers buy that story, and then I feel dissatisfied that they have not tried to read it as fiction. And in non-fiction, I'm always aware of the real fictional undertow under our lives. You know, all our organized lives are actually quite stories. Each day of our life is a little story. And I just try to exploit that, even in my non-fiction, so that one is in touch with narrative and what is being said, what is being left unsaid, and what is the drama of organizing reality. So, am I answering your question?
You are, absolutely you are, yes.
With the instruction about holding the microphone, a complication aa gayi. So it's like...
Yes. One more ball to juggle. Would you like to read a little bit from Yellow Book, which maybe talks a little bit about this process? Or, passage of your choice. Sorry.
Because Devika this morning sent all of us a note saying, listen, the topic of the panel is emotion.
Yes.
Emotion. So I thought कि poetics भी रहे और emotion भी रहे. So I had taken my students, this is Traveler's Diary, and as I said in the session earlier, I had taken my students to London for a semester. So I met a poet there from Punjab. He was a Naxal, and during emergency he had been jailed, and then he escaped to the UK. So I found that one of my heroes, John Berger, had translated this guy's poem by talking to him from Punjabi to English. Okay? And so after my conversation with him, I thought I would translate it into Hindi. So I'll just read his poem in English first, and I know we are in the South. If people have no objection, however, I'll read the Hindi version also. Is it okay? Gunachor. I have never been to Gunachor. When I hear the word Gunachor, something happens to me. Mother used to talk about her distant relations living in Gunachor. I used to fly there on her wings. I felt Gunachor is a place somewhere beyond Jalandhar near Nawan Shahar. A light flickers in darkness seen from above. I imagined the relations I never met. Even now, that place is not far off. It's near, quite near. Wherever I happen to be, my mother is with me, and Gunachor is close by. और अब ये हिंदी में आप सुन लीजिए. गुनाचौर. गुनाचौर में कभी नहीं गया. कोई गुनाचौर का नाम लेता है तो दिल में कुछ होने लगता है. माँ जब गुनाचौर में रहने वाले अपने रिश्तेदारों की बातें किया करती थी और मैं उसके पंखों पे सवार गुनाचौर चला जाता. मुझे लगता गुनाचौर कोई जगह है, कहीं जालंधर के पास नवा शहर से परे. मैं देखता जैसे ऊपर आसमान से दिखाई देती बत्ती है जलती बुझती मैं उन रिश्तेदारों के बारे में सोचता जिनसे कभी मिला नहीं। आज भी वह जगह दूर नहीं, पास ही है, बहुत पास। मैं जहां भी होता हूं वहीं होती है मां, और वहीं होता है गुनाचौर।
Delivered on the mandate.
Kavery, when you're writing non-fiction, do you come to it very differently from when you're writing fiction?
My non-fiction, earlier non-fiction was just articles, essays, that was different. But the book that I did was actually because of the prodding from my publishers about writing a memoir about my surgical life, which has been quite a colorful one. And I hesitated for about 15 years after having signed it with Penguin first. And then I just didn't do it. And finally, I did it. I wrote the book for Speaking Tiger. And it was because it was Ravi in Penguin who had been asking me, you know. And so because it was a memoir, and it was my own experience, my own life. It was, once I started writing, I was very afraid of writing about myself. I thought, it's sort of exhibitionism partly, I don't know, I was not happy. But once I started writing, I found that I could move, and I could write about everything from the time I was young as a medical student, from a child, medical student, and then how I became a doctor, why I went into surgery, why I decided to be a surgeon in rural India after doing my fellowship in England, and what it was like to work in places like Bihar, in dacoit-infested region where I worked, and in Uttar Pradesh again, in Vrindavan, Mathura again, a very, very poor, difficult place. And subsequently the South. So as I wrote it, I realized there was so much there, not just my life, but what I could see about what has happened to medicine in our country and outside it over these years. So I could do that as well. So it was both a subjective and an objective book, which was looking at healthcare in India, and that is why I called it a luxury called health. That was my first non-fiction. Mind you, I find writing non-fiction far more difficult. And it's like a punishment. Not this book, but even if I'm writing an essay, somebody asks me, it is very hard work for me. I just put it off as much as I can. I find non-fiction very tough to do. More a type of person who likes to, flighty type of thing. The second one, Cherry Red, Cherry Black, which is the history of coffee, I wrote, it was commissioned by the Tatas. So it was just, again, I tried very hard to refuse, but finally I had to do it. And I don't regret particularly, but I think by and large, I'm much more comfortable writing fiction. Yes.
So, Manju, Devika, I wanted to ask you, there is for Manju, I think I'll stick only to Difficult Daughters. There is an immense amount of research that clearly went into the book, and it starts off at the time of partition. It could, in another world, it could have been a non-fiction book, and I could say the same of Quarter Life. Did you envisage the books? Clearly, you did as fiction, and just thoughts on how much of research sometimes goes into a work of fiction. I'm saying this because there persists this notion that one can sit down and just write something in, after a work day and in the evenings or early mornings. And because it's fiction, you can just dash it off and it will get published and people will love it. That is more often than not, that's not the case. There's an immense amount of work that goes in. Sometimes at a research level, sometimes just at a thinking level or a construction level. So just your thoughts on that. And followed by that, Manju, if you could read from your book. Yeah, use that one. I think that's what.
So far as I'm concerned, I also shared this idea that fiction is something you just dash off. But in order for my characters, what am I making up? their thoughts and their emotions.
Yeah.
What I'm not making up is the milieu in which they live. And for me, that needed to be, I mean, it's just me, my own comfort with what the facts that I am talking about, the prices of things. I'm a realist novel.
Yeah.
I don't deal in,
Yeah.
So I'm a realist novel, and as a realist novel, I need to get a lot of things right.
Yeah.
And I need to get them right, if for no one else but myself,
Sure.
in order to feel comfortable in writing what I am, in making up the things that I do, which is conversation, emotion, situations, but not the milieu in which those conversation, emotions, and things take place. So that's it. So, okay, I'll quickly read, since I had come prepared with this reading.
We'll just quickly hear Devika's thoughts on this same question, and then we can close with your reading.
So when I was researching the book, because there was such extensive, almost ethnographic research involved, many friends asked me why I wasn't writing a book of nonfiction. And I think these things are instinctive choices at some level, but the question sort of made me think on what is the fundamental difference between the process of writing fiction and nonfiction, given that there is a lot of sort of fiction in nonfiction and nonfiction in fiction. And I think what it boils down to is that when you're writing fiction, you don't carry any burden of proof. And when you don't carry the burden of proof, it frees you up to do imaginative things with your reality. And I'll just very quickly dwell on one or two of those things. One is, I think, something that all fiction writers do, which is the creation of composites. So a composite is usually, so for example, if I speak to 10 young boys in the hinterland who have gone to shakhas, my composite character will be a character who has the nose of one and the punchline of another and the rakish hairdo of the third, and the yellow Nirvana shirt of the fourth. And I think all writers do that at some level subconsciously. And what you are looking for when you make a composite is whether, and you will know it, and the editor will know it, and the reader will know it, whether something rings true.
Right.
And I think to kind of arrive at that shared reality, to, that kind of essence of something, that is what takes so much research and so much time, because one man's testimony is not enough. One fact is not enough. You need 10 testimonies or 10 facts that you can sort of then distill into that one character.
For it to really come together, yep.
Yeah, so that is one. And very quickly, the other would be, I think, interiority,
Yes.
which is something Manju also spoke about,
Yeah.
which is not just another character's thoughts or confessions, but how they perceive the entire world, the smell of rain, every little detail about their subjectivity. And I think that's something you cannot do in nonfiction, because the moment you step into someone else's head, you are taking a creative leap. That is not fact. So that is the domain of fiction. You cannot do it in film because you are limited to a two-dimensional thing. And so I think that is the other space where you really, it really takes time to stick that together and to inhabit that reality of another person. But that is also the deep pleasure and discomfort of fiction, being in the heads of people very different from you. So that's
Fantastic point. Yep. Manju, shall we read and then we'll close? Yeah.
Okay, now this is from my latest book called The Gallery, and I photocopied these, I printed these pages before I came here. So The Gallery is basically about two families. One is in the employment of the other. So it's also about class and social mobility and how these things are negotiated. So Meenal, the employer of the other woman, has gone away, and she comes back to thank her mother for looking after her daughter. And she looks after the maid and the maid's daughter as well. Thank you, Mama, for looking after baby and Tashi too. Arre beta, what is all this thanking? Why so formal with your own mother? For Mrs. Malhotra, devotion to her family was to be taken for granted. To even thank was to suggest the possibility that her care was not on call at all hours of the day. It was to consign her to uselessness, to deprive her of the element in which she thrived. Where did Tashi spend the evening? That's the maid's daughter. Your maid kept her inside watching TV. I didn't even need to say anything. Sensible woman. Otherwise, who brings up their maid's daughter with their own. Akhil and Nikhil's maids' children are in the village. We send them clothes, toys, books, and everybody is happy. Here too, everybody is happy. On the other hand, they did play together very nicely, said Mrs. Malhotra, to show she could be as broad-minded as the rest of them. Anyway, then the family comes back to Delhi. And Meenal thinks, that's the mother, how could I have left her for 16, 17 days, really, if you count the travel time? Thought Meenal, as she told Mati she would give baby her breakfast. Mati silently put the child's milk in front of the mother along with an egg white omelette. Alok had protested at the need to feed their daughter the diet of an advanced coronary patient. But I am not filling her with cholesterol, said Meenal. Dr. Jagtiani says Indians have the highest rate of heart disease in the world. Crazy pediatrician was all Alok had to say. Now she cut the omelette up into small pieces and gave her the glass of milk. One swallow and it was pushed away. Chini. Was the child asking for sugar? Sugar was poison. Her vigilance over ice cream, cake, chocolate, toffees, and biscuits had never slackened, nor had her quarrels with those insisting that childhood should be a time of fun and frolic and unlimited sweet things. She took a sip. Ugh, it's so sweet, and you want more. Mati, why you put sugar in baby's milk? Baby fussing, missing you, Maji said, give. Akhil Nikhil also drink, came Mati's voice. But you have to listen to me, not Maji. Baby wanted. She was having milk with them. Meenal tried and failed to pull her thoughts away from the wrongs done to her. Starting with Mati, extending to her mother, it was ultimately her mother's fault. Why was she so happy to undermine her? Mati, sugar is bad for her teeth, bad for her weight, bad for her eating habits, bad for everything. Just half a spoon, Mem Saab. You're lying. This is not half a spoon. What would it be next? Opium? Really? There was no trusting these people, no trusting them. For Mati, Alora's eventual habits did not matter at all, not at all. For she was just the hired help doing her job. Granted, she did it well. But when a convenient shortcut presented itself, it would be taken. She took some deep breaths. Her instructions hadn't been exact, more implicit than explicit. But could one think of every twist in the road, every hitch in the story? I drank sugar in my milk. It hasn't done me any harm, said Alok about the issue. Alok's the husband. Meena looked at the once lean body collecting flesh in the region of the stomach. The husband's undisciplined taste made Meenal more determined to keep Alora off sugar.
Manju, sorry, we'll stop because
okay.
we're out of time. Lovely passage. The book is out very soon. You'll be able to read all of it. Thank you, all of you. A wonderful conversation, and I hope everyone enjoyed it too. Thank you.